a star is shorn. Our story begins in the Greek underworld. And yes, I do know Greek underworld sounds a bit like Greek underwear, but let me assure you that our story has nothing to do with pants. In fact, the ghosts who haunt this underworld don't even wear pants, because pants haven't been invented by the time they died. So please do stop talking about pants and let me get on. Now, where was I? Ah yes, the Greek underworld. It lies many miles beneath our feet and nestles at the centre of the earth like the stone in a peach, brimming with sun-dappled waterfalls and forests. It's home to every potter, poet, thinker, soldier, slave, actor, dog, cat, goat and olive tree who ever lived in ancient Greece, including Ares, the ghost ram of the Golden Fleece and the hero of our story. Now a ram, for those non-shepherds amongst you, is a male sheep and a fleece is his coat. Usually a fleece is made of wool, snagged with twigs and leaves, and is quite often dribbly with dung, but not this one. The Golden Fleece, as its name suggests, was made of pure, glittering gold, dazzling to look at, and absolutely priceless. On the afternoon our story begins, Ares was hiding in a bank of underworld laurels that encircled a special building called the Hero's Pavilion. Carved from the creamiest marble, it looked like an ancient Greek temple. A row of columns topped by swirls of stone leaves ran all the way round its sides, whilst the panels beneath its roof had been carved to show several Greek heroes, their hair and armour picked out in gold and silver paints, which made Ares want to wee on it. And I know what you're thinking. Ghosts aren't supposed to wee, are they? They're not supposed to burp or blow their noses either, but let me assure you that the ghosts in the Greek underworld do, and plenty of other much ruder things besides. And while we're on the topic of underworld ghosts, that is, not ruder things, I might as well mention that Ares, like all the underworld spirits, wasn't invisible either. He didn't shimmer, he didn't waver like a heat haze, he didn't leave glowing hoof prints where he'd trotted, and he most certainly didn't vanish like fog. In fact, he was just as bulky as the rams you see up here standing in fields on earth, only bigger, much bigger. Wide as an overstuffed armchair, Ares rippled with muscles, brawn quivered up his legs and thickened his back, tendons stood taut as ship's cables along his chest and strained around his wide neck. His face was handsome, and some, Ares mostly, said it was noble, lit by treacle-coloured eyes and glittery with gold dust. On either side of his head, gilded horns looped out like twisty handlebars on a bicycle. And since by now I'm sure you're imagining the most awesome and handsome of rams, I ought to mention one other thing. Quite a big thing, actually. The ram of the Golden Fleece was bald. That's right, bald. As bald as a grape, as bald as an artificial eye, as bald as an ice cube, as bald as the world's baldest crab whose shell has been polished to a blinding baldness by the tide. Not one gilded knot, curl, cowlick or twirl remained on his body. Gone were the ringlets that fronded his brow and the blaze that had dazzled down his neck. Gone was the fiery thatch across his back and the shimmering coils of gold over his shanks, because before he'd been sacrificed to the gods, his fleece had been sheared off first. And since ghost rams can't regrow their wool, Ares' ghost had remained the colour of 3-day-old porridge and bulged like a cheap duvet. Which brings me to why the most famous ram in history was hiding in a bush in the first place. The problem was that, without his magnificent coat, everyone treated him like any other ordinary sheep. Can you imagine? The ram of the Golden Fleece, reduced to the sort of sheep you might see bouncing about in a field on a wet hillside, the sort of sheep banned from all the important places like the Hero's Pavilion because he might eat the dahlias or leave warm, smelly presents on the lawns. Worse still, the sort of sheep that ancient Greek ghosts loved to chase and pick on because he was bald and funny looking, all of which made Ares furious enough to hide in laurels every day to wait for the chance to sneak out and wee down the pavilion's gleaming walls. Except today he couldn't. Today the place was busier than the Agora on Buy One Get One Free Day. Ghost slaves had been tottering past them most of the afternoon, carrying tables, stools and benches, pots of lilies and jugs slopping with red wine. Serving women in white dresses had picked their way through the honking, flapping swans, specially coloured gold and silver for the party, to take in platters of pork and beef, or bowls dripping with grapes, plums and olives. Crossing his legs, Ares wondered at the ivory-coloured ribbons and swags of pink roses that had been tied to the pavilion columns. Clearly, he realised, something important was happening today. But what? As if in answer, 2 slaves scrambled up onto the tall urns either side of the pavilion door and tied a banner above it which read, "The anniversary of Jason and the Argonauts, our heroes." "Jason and the Argonauts," snorted Ares in disgust. "Heroes!" The words buzzed round his brain like flies around a cow pat in summer. "I'd better explain. Jason was an ancient Greek prince, and the Argonauts were the men who'd sailed with him on a ship called the Argo many years ago when they'd all been alive. Together they'd journeyed to the island of Colchis, where Jason had stolen Ares' fleece. Yes, stolen it. Snitched, snaffled, swiped it from where it hung high in a treetop in the middle of an enchanted forest protected by an enormous snake called Draco. Luckily for Jason, the king's daughter, Medea, who was a sorceress, had fallen in love with him and helped him. However, to tell you the truth, she was rather an unpleasant person, and I don't like talking about her unless I really, really have to. So I won't. But if you really must know what she did, take a look in the back of this book. I wouldn't. Now, glaring at the banner, Ares found his 4 stomachs knitted with anger as he remembered that terrible night back in the forest at Colchis. That's right, remembered, because what the old books of Greek myths never mention, because the old Greek writers, such as Apollonius, preferred to write about glamorous people like Jason and Medea rather than bald rams, was that Ares was there. Actually there that night. As a matter of fact, Ares had been there haunting the forest for years before Jason turned up, because he'd been unable to leave his beloved fleece behind. Even with only Draco the snake 20 metres of slither, slime and stinky breath to talk to, he'd been happy, because every so often Draco would lift the fleece down from the branches and lay it over Ares' back. And then, comforted beneath its sparkling weight, Ares felt special again. It didn't matter that in reality he was hock deep in the stink mud of the forest, because in his mind he was the ram of the golden fleece again, handsome and majestic, flying, because his coat was not only beautiful but magical too, over the blue Aegean Sea. Screwing his eyes tight shut, he'd tilt his shoulders, imagine himself shooting like a golden comet across a cloudless sky, the claps and whoops of the crowds below ringing in his ears. And then Jason had arrived. Even now, a lump rose in Ares' throat as he recalled scrambling to the top of the cliffs around Colchis harbour that moonlit night to catch a last glimpse of his fleece glittering over the prow of the Argo as it sailed towards the horizon. He'd never seen it again. No, because after Jason returned home and married Medea, he'd only gone and lost it like an umbrella on a bus. But unlike Jason, the fleece had never turned up in the underworld, which made Ares' horns twitch to butt Jason into the lake every time he thought about it, which was all the time. At last, the lawns fell quiet. Ares stuck his nose through the leaves and peered around. Only a few dancing women were left, practising steps on the far side of the lawn. This was his chance. Uncrossing his back legs, he shuffled forwards, only to be stopped by a familiar and extremely annoying voice. "Hello, ladies," it said. Ares ducked back into the greenery as Jason strutted out along the top of the pavilion steps, dressed in his best white chiton, his famous leopard skin draped over his right shoulder. He tossed back his shoulder-length blonde hair and stroked his beard, smiling. A moment later, the women raced over the grass to him and stood around him, their faces upturned, flushed and pink. Jason nodded towards the banner. "Wonderful, isn't it?" he said. "All this just for me?" The women giggled prettily, and Ares felt his heart clench. Snatching a mouthful of laurel leaves, he watched the dancer with long black hair, threaded with lilies, hurry up the steps and link arms with Jason. "They say you've been in secret training," she cooed, the silver bells on her belt jingling as she led him towards the others. "Training for what?" Ares thought sourly. "Getting his tunic on the right way round." "We know you can beat the others," said a willowy, fair-headed woman. She stroked his muscled shoulder. "But we'll miss you so much when you're up there." Ares' jaw fell open, the 2 laurel leaves forgotten in his mouth. Up there? There was only one place that was up there. Earth. And no ordinary ghost from the underworld had ever been allowed to return there. The gods only knew he'd begged King Hades often enough to let him go back, just once to search for his fleece. But no, it was absolutely forbidden by the underworld law. He stared at the fair-headed woman, willing her to say more, to explain. But instead she began clapping her hands and singing some rubbish about brave heroes on quests, while the others joined hands and skipped around Jason. Questions galloped through his mind. Who was going back to Earth? How would they be chosen? Why did no one ever tell him anything down here? How in the name of Olympus was he going to find out? There were questions, he raged, that clearly wouldn't be answered by a group of women jingling their bells. And then the answer struck him. Like a hail ball from the skies, it was so big and obvious he wondered why it hadn't hit him before. Of course there was someone who'd know, he realised. Someone who always knew everything, from what the gods were planning to what the pavilion cat had dragged in the night before. Someone who was at this very moment quite alone in the otherwise deserted pavilion. Ignoring the scratch and jab of the branches, Ares bustled backwards out of the laurels, hunched down, tippy-hoofed to the back of the pavilion and, oh dear, hold on a moment, would you? Do try to ignore that splashy noise. Right, where was I? Oh yes, now that Ares had relieved himself, he hurried over to the servant's door to the pavilion. He pressed his forehead against the sun-warmed wood and began to push. Of course, a full frontal charge would have been much quicker, but it would have also been much noisier, and Ares couldn't afford to be discovered before he'd had the chance to ask his questions. Taking a deep breath, Ares struck his hooves into the ground, stiffened his legs, and forced his full weight against the door. There was a keening sound, followed by a sharp crack and splintering as the wood gave way. Ares nosed the shards out of the way and squeezed quickly through the hole into the pavilion kitchen. On either side of him, wooden tables stretched away, piled high with food and hundreds of goblets that twinkled in the sunlight. A gloomy-looking stuffed peacock sat on a heap of glazed reeds, stared blindly down at him from a shelf as he clattered through into the grand hall. Tall and airy, the hall was dominated by rows of looming white pillars with the statues of each of the 50 Argonauts set between them. Whenever he'd crept in before, he'd blown raspberries at Tiphys, the helmsman of the Argo and the Argonauts' getaway driver that night, and waggled his bottom at Pollux, supposedly the son of the west wind, who Ares thought was more like an annoying draught under the door. But he didn't have time today. Instead, he clattered quickly down the hall, his hoofs squealing against the mosaic floor, and skidded around the corner. There she was. The bowsprit from the Argo hung above the door to the dining hall, snoozing. A bowsprit, in case you didn't know, is a wooden figurehead that decorates the prow of a ship and is often carved to look like the head and shoulders of a woman. And being made of a clump of wood, they don't usually know that much. However, this bowsprit was different. Hewn from an oak tree that grew in the magical woodland of Dordona and enchanted by Athena, goddess of wisdom, this bowsprit had answered all the Argonauts' questions. Wise and thoughtful, she had guided the Argo to Colchis with tips such as turn right at the pole, star, take a left after the clashing rocks, and turn around where possible. Psst, hissed Ares. The bowsprit's eyes flicked open. Danger or shipping, she announced. Major obstacle in the water. Do you mind? Hissed Ares. The bowsprit shrugged her shoulders, creaking like old floorboards. Once her cherry-wood face had been polished to a toffee-coloured sheen, her lips painted rose red, her eyes inlaid with ebony, but over the years she'd become infested with woodworm. Far from her life of sea adventures, she now spent most of her time moaning about where the cleaners stuck their feather dusters. What do you want? She muttered, raising a sea-stained eyebrow. I want to know what's happening tonight, said Ares breathlessly, putting on his most engaging smile, which, to be honest, was rather frightening. The bowsprit regarded him for a moment, blinking her creaking eyelashes. What's in it for me? Linseed oil? Pot of beeswax? Said Ares. It'll work wonders for your wrinkles. They're not wrinkles, snipped the bowsprit. They're laughter lines. Really? Ares frowned. That must have been some joke. The bowsprit stuck her nose in the air. I'm sorry, soothed Ares, quickly realising his mistake. I really didn't mean that. The bowsprit sniffed. However, said Ares, I have heard that beeswax made from the hives of Elysium can work wonders even on wood that's already beautiful. Already beautiful? Ares nodded. Obviously you don't need it, but if you're curious, I could bring you some. Probably turn you back into a sapling, a mere twig of a girl. The bowsprit tilted her head, interested. And you'll throw in a muslin duster? Certainly, said Ares. He'd be quite prepared to throw in his grandmother if it meant getting some answers. Done. The bowsprit licked her splintered lips. There's a party tonight. And, prompted Ares, it's going to be amazing, the bowsprit continued. Athena's celebrating the Argonauts' anniversary by holding a competition. What's more, they've made me a crown of laurels, just like they put on the statues in the Olympics. What's it for? Said Ares. To accentuate my good looks, of course. No, Ares shook his head impatiently. I meant the competition. Oh, that, the bowsprit smiled coolly. It's a special assault course to decide who'll be allowed back to Earth on a quest. Ares stared speechless. Oh, I know, the bowsprit continued. There's never been a competition like it before, and it'll be tough, but Athena wanted something memorable to mark the occasion. Mind you, everyone knows that Jason will win. I mean, he's just totally awesome. Awesome, my hoof, spluttered Ares. You were stuck on that boat that night. You didn't see him in the forest at Colchis, shivering like a swamp rat in the shadows while a teenage girl did all his dirty work. So you keep saying, sniffed the bowsprit, as if Jason would hide when there was a giant snake to fight. Her face grew soft and dreamy. Oh, Jason, she sighed, those glorious days we spent at sea together. But Ares had heard enough. Swinging his head round, he turned back towards the great hall and began clomping out. Jason, is it? He muttered, looking back over his massive shoulders at the bowsprit's contented face. Win the quest and return to Earth where my fleece is still hidden. He harumphed loudly. We'll see about that.